So here I am, the bells have finally stopped. I'm standing outside Westminster Abbey, just around the corner from the House of Lords. It shows you that a week is a long time in politics, because the last time we did Inside the Lords, Westminster Abbey was the place that we were discussing in relation to the Queen's funeral, and we all were completely thinking about the way that the UK would be with a new king, what the impact of that whole period was, and it just feels like so many years ago now, because so much has happened in the last week. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about the economic situation that we're in. The first thing I want to say is that the period that we're now going through is frightening, and I think that those people who are saying, you know, never mind heating the house, I'm worried about keeping the house, and the prospect of interest rates going up, people defaulting on their mortgages, things being out of control, that is a frightening period. It gives you a kind of real sense that you've got no control over your life, and that you're kind of watching as Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, and a cabinet that had barely met announced wide-scale sweeping economic changes. They're getting, originally they got some credit for being brave and daring, and the first thing I want to say was, when I saw the budgetary announcements, yes, it was shocking because it was so wide scale, but the last thing that I would call it was courageous and brave and daring, because all that they have done is basically say that they're going to remove all barriers as they perceive it, and get rid of taxes, cut taxes, and that will lead to, spontaneously, the hidden hand of the market bringing forth economic growth. I mean, I don't know what year you would have been into university to have studied economics that way and realised that's completely superficial and glib. Actually lacks any ambition in terms of the real problems that the UK economy is in. That didn't start with Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss. It didn't start with Boris Johnson. It's got, in a way, when I say it's got nothing to do with the Tories, that's not to let them off the hook. But the real crisis of productivity in the UK economy has been documented and has been going on for, you know, well over a decade, longer. It's a deep-seated problem, and what we require is investment in productive technology, innovation, risk-taking in certain industries. A real, you know, the announcement is that we have a plan from growth, but there is no plan, and this is not a question of calling for mass state intervention, but it's calling for leadership that starts to say, we will incentivise growth in this area. We will actually encourage and ensure that new industries are set up around here. We're going to take some risks. Not all industries will work. It's not about making a sort of headline-grabbing announcement about fracking, for example, and then saying, but we'll only do it if local communities agree. It's about having an actually worked through energy policy. What's happened to the investment in nuclear power? But what about new energy sources? And I don't mean renewables hemmed in by environmentalism. I mean anything and every possible energy source. And that kind of imaginative intervention into the economy can't be designed in a seminar room or in a think tank. That requires a full democratic discussion with people around the country who will know what skills we've got, what skills we need, what needs to be developed, what a particular area could really exploit, how we're going to make the best of biotech in one area, what kind, you know, whether we need to have new work on electric batteries, because we know they're really important in another area, what kind of high-tech solutions we need, all of these things. I was in Grimsby for the question time last week, and the people of Grimsby will be best placed to know how best to modernise, industrialise the fishing industry, but they'll also know they don't want to be depending on fishing industry all their lives. So are we going to have the ambition to be the greatest marine science and technology, a world-beating marine science and technology leader? That's the sort of kind of conversations we need to have, not just cut the taxes back, sit back. The implication is that we have a corporates and capitalist class who are going to rush in and have just been waiting for the opportunity to invest in all this productive life. That's not going to happen because they have not been doing that for a long time. There's been plenty of money sloshing around. It's not been invested productively. They've taken the easy option. They want easy profits, they want quick money, and they don't want to take any risks, which is why we're in this mess. Because I'm afraid that the economic plans were no more than kind of scribbles on the back of an envelope that thought if you remove all responsibility, leave it up to the capitalists, it'll all work out, and it's not going to. That's quite depressing, isn't it? And one of the things that strikes me is because you have this kind of feeling of, oh, there's no control over this, it is so easy to become demoralised and depressed. And some people will say, well, it's all right because I'm just going to switch my vote over to Labour. I mean, my view is, by the way, when Keir Starmer says, don't forgive, don't forget, I'm taking him at his word. He's absolutely right. And the problem is I don't forgive or forget Keir Starmer and the Labour Party and what they've done. And even though they've got a more competent plan in relation to the economy, there's a lot more in politics than economic life. We know from Brexit that people are not only driven to act upon the world and to change history by what's happening in the economy, but by values, by things that they believe in, and by ideals such as sovereignty in that instance, democratic accountability, and all of the issues that surround the culture wars, the issues that people are very disdainful of and say, oh, how could you be talking about gender at this time? What are you going on about race charters, or why are you talking about whether somebody calls somebody superficially black? You know what? Don't we get sidelined by these? These things are deep rooted in the way that society has become dysfunctional about debate and discussion. You know, you can't say certain things without getting cancelled. That the culture wars has kind of ripped the heart out of people knowing exactly what they believe in, because you're frightened, you're pussyfooting around in terms of really thinking about what Britain represents. And if you're going to have a British economy, you have to have a British politics. And politics and the economy are not separate spheres. You know, a sense of dynamism, a sense of forward thinking has to be something that is engendered not just in terms of whether you've got a fishing industry or whether you're going to have an energy industry. It's about the way that you approach the future, how you actually learn from the past rather than cancelling the past, how you have a sense of optimism that's based on a real grounded, firm knowledge of what's happening today. And in that context, I think, you know, that this year's Battle of Ideas Festival is going to be essential as I hope, a contribution to that democratic discussion and debate. You know, this is not experts that come and lecture us. This is a weekend of public discussion, 15th and 16th of October, at the heart of Westminster in Church House, with 100 panel debates, with 400 speakers, but not people who are there to kind of give us the answers, but people who are there to initiate important questions and discussions and political conversations. These are public conversations about what we're going to do, not just about the economy, but how we are going to tackle everything from institutional meltdown in the civil service and the police, through to the big science and medical questions of our time, like curing cancer, like what we're going to do about the crisis in the health service and the fact that GPs just won't see people, seem to be retiring the whole time. And on that note, what are we going to do about a generation of young people who seem to think that going to work is a kind of added extra? I mean, you can't have a productive economy if that's our attitude to the workplace. 100 topics, so, you know, loads more where that comes from. So I hope that you will come along. Parliament isn't working at the moment, so I'll just finish off with this. But I've actually been inside the Lords quite a lot this week, partly showing people around, and for the first time ever, because if you're in the Lords you're not really allowed to go into the Commons chamber, but as a kind of tourist you are. So as somebody showing people around, I've been into the Commons chamber, and actually, you know, you do think this is the seat of democracy, the home of democracy, and in comparison with the Lords, which is all gold and glitz. This is much more kind of earthy wood and green leather and so on. But the main thing that struck me was how small it was. You know, it's no wonder that those debates get quite heated, because people are kind of very close to each other. But I'm afraid that I don't think it's just a physical closeness and a physical smallness. It feels to me as though at the moment, although Parliament is not operating, and people are saying we should be called Parliament, that actually the solution to what needs to happen in relation to the crises that we face internationally, in terms of the whole international picture, in terms of what we're facing in relation to the economy, aren't going to just be resolved by a group of people in the House of Commons. It's too small to deal with the huge enormity of what we face. What that requires is a reinvigorated democratic sphere, and that's what I hope the Battle of Ideas will do. Again, a real parliament for the people. It's at least part of the solution for that. And so the final thought that I have is that the actions of Liz Truss and her cabinet and Kwasi Kwarteng and the few people who are behind them undoubtedly have ignited an economic crisis that's very serious. I don't underestimate that. But they are not to blame for it in a simple lashing out blame game. This has to be understood in a context of historic stagnatory trends in the economy that actually all political parties have contributed to. And one of the big culprits here is an anti-growth atmosphere, particularly encapsulated in environmentalist ideological outlooks of don't grow, don't invest, we've got to cut back, and so on and so forth. So we've got to understand our history. It's also in the context of what's happening globally. The world has gone from the Cold War to being unipolar around America to now multipolar. We have a war at the heart of Europe. We have the rise of China. We cannot underestimate not just the impact of the war in Ukraine on energy. That's just too narrow a way of understanding it. But the way that Europe is completely at odds with itself, as it were. And I think that the populist vote in Italy, the populist vote in Sweden would indicate that the electorate feel that they're not satisfied with mainstream political parties and with what's being offered. And I think all of that kind of international context, again, being discussed in a lot of detail at the Battle of Ideas, should indicate to us that we shouldn't just get stuck in the present and just be frightened and feel fatalistically we're the victims of what's happening, but actually start taking responsibility ourselves. No point just blaming politicians. We, as the public, have got to get involved in this, take back control of this discussion and the direction that this country is going in, and partly that requires understanding how we got here and understanding how we get out. So buy your Battle of Ideas ticket, not only because we want as many people as possible there for it to be a great festival, but actually because we want as many people there to start off the kind of conversations that we need to have urgently in order to get ourselves out of this mess, and a sense of solidarity with each other where we can all bring our collective minds, intellects, instincts and experience and skills to the discussion will actually be far more effective than anything that goes on in the chambers of the House of Commons or the House of Lords.